Today on Blue Values TV, how do we conduct elections in Placer County and what do we do to increase voter turnout and voter registration? Stay tuned. Welcome to Blue Values TV, a production of the Blue Values Coalition. The Blue Values Coalition is dedicated to informing, educating, and engaging our neighbors in the governance of our communities. Look for us online at www.bluevaluescoalition.org. This is Jack Uppel, your host. This year on Blue Values TV, we are going to be interviewing candidates and discussing issues of interest to voters in Placer County. If any of our viewers have suggestions for topics that they would like to see discussed on Blue Values TV this year, please contact us at bluevaluescoalition@gmail.com. Our guest today is Mr. Jim McCauley, the Placer County, let me read this long title, the Placer County Clerk, Recorder, Registrar of Voters, Commissioner of Marriages, and I don't know what else you do in Placer County. I'm sure you do a lot. This is a position that he has held since 1993.
Yes, sir.
Mr. McCauley has multiple college degrees in public administration and campaign management, and he had 15 years of experience in the Los Angeles County Elections Office before he came to Placer County in 1987. I should add that Mr. McCauley is up for re-election this November. So welcome, Mr. McCauley.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So, as the Registrar of Voters in Placer County, you're tasked with running all the public elections that we have. What are the challenges that we face in the running elections now? And what do you see as the future efforts that are needed in your position?
Well, interesting question. I feel that we have to make a major effort, and I'm talking about all my peer group members, to take the mystery out of election. After the Florida elections of 2000, the public really had a distrust of the registrars across the United States. You know, were we doing our job properly? Mm-hmm. Was the voting systems that we had, would they work as advertised? And that's when Congress passed the Help American Voting Act. And Placer County received $2.2 million. And we were required to have a voting device in each polling place that a handicapped person could use and vote on without assistance from the election board itself. So we did that, and we have our main system is a ballot counting system. It's a hard ballot. And when you put it in the machine makes the total of how the voter voted, and the ballot drops into the ballot box. So we have a hard copy of that ballot. Mm-hmm. So if there's ever any question about the results of the election, we can go back and count it by hand.
The intent of the voter or anything like that.
Exactly, mm-hmm. Exactly. But with these touchscreen machines, we spent $2 million for that system that I was talking about earlier. How many voters do you think voted on that generally?
A handful?
Yes.
Less than the number of fingers on my hand?
Yes. We've had up to one vote.
One vote? For
$2 million. We've had 6 and 7. Majority of the time it's under 10.
Not a very cost-effective way of doing things, is it?
No, but I think that the legislators in D.C. felt that anything to encourage voting, including a handicapped voter, they felt suit to financially back.
And that's an important point. The real effort and the real focus of the legislature and of the Secretary of State and the registrars of voters throughout the state of California is to make it easy for people to register and to vote.
Correct.
That's the main focus, and that's something that everyone needs to understand.
Right. Well, California, fortunately, has been ahead of the curve for many, many years. I've always said that California has the best election laws in the United States. What happened in Florida back in 2000 never would have happened in California because we have regs that tell us exactly, step by step by step, how to count a ballot, how not to count a ballot.
Right.
And which is important. And but we were very fortunate again to live in Placer County because we have the highest voter registration. We're number one in counties that have more than 200,000 registered voters in them, and we're number 5 in the state, and that's taking in all the small counties that have
Right.
maybe
Like
2,000,
Alpine County.
5,000 voters. Exactly.
I think Alpine County always leads the state in registration.
Yes, but we're number one in as far as what's considered a large county. A lot of that registration, 81%, has come by way of our high school voter outreach program.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because historically one of the problems has been getting young people, people that turn 18 years old, to register to vote, and then getting them out to actually vote.
Right. And
So
that's
what have you done in that area?
Well, when I took office back in 1993, I saw the problem with the young voters, and it was every county in the state. We had about 20% of the young voters, 18 to 24, were registered to vote, and of that 20%, about 18% actually voted on election day. So we did a lot of research.
And I might add, that's close to an average.
Yes, that's a national average.
That's a national average. So
Right.
Placer County was right in line with the national average.
Yes, yes. So I still didn't feel that was good enough, and so I did a lot of research. Why didn't the young voters vote? Why did they did not become registered voters? Number one is that they were a little bit intimidated to walk into a polling place the first time.
Imagine that.
Because
Teenagers intimidated because they were unfamiliar with something. Huh?
Exactly. They didn't want to look bad in front of the adults. And the number 2 reason why, and it's going to sound very, very strange to you, no one really gives them an opportunity to become a registered voter. I.e., no one puts a registration card in front of them and tells them, fill out the card, you become a registered voter. So we've developed this program, and it's the only program in the state of California like this. What we do is we invite speakers from the Democratic, Republican, Central Committees, plus any minor party that may have an interest. And we take out the county supervisor for the district that we're in, and we go to every high school in Placer County, including the continuation schools. And with our registration efforts, 82% of the young adults are currently registered to vote. And beyond that,
82%.
right, and beyond that, 68% voted in the last election.
So 82% compares how with the rest of the state?
There's no one even close to us.
No one even close.
No. We probably have almost like a 3-to-1 advantage over any other
Wow.
county.
Now, why are other counties not taking on this kind of, or are they taking on this effort and starting to do the same thing?
Not really. It always gets down to time, dollars, and money.
Yeah.
And they haven't really, they've looked at our program, they love it, but the same answer across the board, we don't have the time to do it. Well, by getting the central committees involved, the people of Placer County, if you will, the cost factor is very small. And yes, is it time? But I think that time is very important. And when we talk to the kids, we talk at their level. What's important to them? Do you want to wear uniforms at your high school? Do you like a closed campus?
And they get to ask questions
Exactly.
of the different
Right.
parties.
And so, we put the registration card in front of them. We ask them to fill it out. We have practice ballots. We get them very acquainted with the voting mechanisms. And it's been a very, very successful program.
And I think you do something else. Besides showing them how to vote, you also talk to them about what it's like to run for office?
Yes, yes. And one story I always like to mention, and it's a true story. In Colfax, a few years back, for mayor, we had a tied election. We went back and we counted them again by hand, still tied. We counted them a third time. It was still tied. So how did the mayor become a mayor of Colfax? We got a hat. We put numbers 1 through 10. The person who drew the highest number became mayor. If one more 18-year-old had voted,
Right.
that person would have decided the election.
That's right.
So, you know, it's one of the things I'm very proud of. We've won the Hall of Fame award. We're the only county ever to win that award from the Secretary of State's office. Elections have changed dramatically over the last 7 or 8 years. Right now in Placer County, 63% of all the registered voters vote by mail.
63%.
Right. I mail their ballot to them for every election. I have another 9,000 voters that do not have a polling place, because the law says that if the precinct has less than 250 voters in it, it becomes a mail ballot precinct.
Right.
And then I usually get about another 8,000 or 9,000 on top of that from people who just aren't going to be in town for election day. So what does all that mean? 74% of my vote is starting to come by way of mail.
Right.
And what happens at the polling place, maybe we'll have 10, 15% turnout at the polling place. So how the election's been decided, probably for a very large part, is the people that are voting by mail.
So if the mail ballots go out about a month or so before the election,
29 days.
candidates pretty much need to know, and they do tend to know that
Right.
look, you better have your message out at about that time.
Right. I have told all of the candidates that, you know, that 16% of the people, after they receive that ballot, will vote it within 72 hours.
Right.
The rest will come in during the time period for voting, and then the last weekend, we'll get probably about 25,000 ballots that we won't be able to process. And we get thousands of ballots that are turned into the polling places
Right.
on the day of the election. So it's not unusual for us to carry like 26,000 ballots into the canvas, because we have to check those ballots, their signatures match,
Right.
and then we process them, we count them in the same fashion that everybody else's ballot is counted.
Right.
That's why we have 28 days to verify the election after the election date. Right.
Now, a lot of what I hear across the different states and so on is idea that we have a lot of voter fraud happening and we need to institute ID checks for voters. What's your experience with that?
Well, I think back in 1974, when California first allowed the mail-in registration cards, I know of cases where people registered their dog or their 16-year-old kid or their 2-year-old baby. But that was a problem for about 4 or 5 years. But now, with the requirement that when they go get their driver's license, you have to show your birth certificate. Now, that is where the Secretary of State is working with the DMV and the counties, and we will create this California national database for voters. And I'll be able to look if somebody's registered in San Diego and they've moved to Placer, then I know to contact San Diego to cancel their registration. So, yeah, the future looks very bright, and I don't consider fraud a major factor today in Placer County.
Good, that's good to hear. So, Mr. McCauley, there's also been a lot of work done to make it easier for people to register to vote. And
Yes.
I believe one of the new changes last year was allowing internet voting, internet registration.
Yes, yes, that's true. You can register to vote by way of the internet now.
And so that should make the registration process much easier.
I agree. Yes, it will, and also in the sample ballot, we are going to put something in that you can get registration completed by way of the internet.
In the sample ballot,
In the
but
sample
the sample ballot only
I know. I'm
goes
just.
out-
No, but what I do is I've always pushed information in there for them that may not.
That may not apply to those people.
Right.
Right. So
But-
that they can let other people know that,
Exactly.
hey. Yeah, okay. Fantastic. Now, that's registration. Voting has some concerns. Doing internet voting has some other concerns?
Yes, and the biggest concern for us to use internet voting would be the confidentiality factor. Now, for the military, we now do that for them. But when we send the form back to them, there's a place where they sign where they realize they're giving up the confidentiality of their ballot. And when they send it back, then we dupe that on a ballot stock card, and then that card is counted like everybody else's.
Right, right. Now, there is a third thing, so I'm going to jump back a little bit to
Okay.
registration, and that's the idea of same-day registration.
Yes. The Secretary of State has said that that is one of her goals, to have same-day registration. The biggest hurdle is, number one, the way the law is written now would be that they would have to come to our office to register to vote. And then we would count that ballot during the canvass, because we have to check to make sure that that person is not a registered voter in another
Elsewhere.
county. And that's what we need the Secretary of State for, because the Secretary of State's creating a major database for each county based upon the DMV records.
Okay.
Okay, so until all that is put together, then once that is put together, we'll have Election Day registration.
Now, election day, so what I hear you saying is that if it does happen, same-day registration, it would need to take place in person at
Yes.
the elections office.
Right,
Could
that's-
not take place over the internet or something like that.
Not in the present form that they've been talking about.
Okay. It's all hypothetical,
Yes,
because
yes.
it hasn't happened yet, but I understand that.
But no, the way that they want it to set it up, where the voter would have to come to the elections office to vote, and that would be same day registration.
So basically, we're trying to pull out all the stops and make it easier and easier for people to be able to register and to vote.
Definitely.
That's basically the idea.
Right, and that's what we're in business for. We're on the election side. We're in business to make the voting experience as easy and as comfortable as possible.
Now, we had a very significant change in our voting law and election laws a couple of years ago, where we went to this top two primary system.
Yes.
Can you describe that a little bit? Because I believe I've encountered so many people that are still confused and
Right.
uncertain about that.
Okay, the way it works is that in the June primary election, the two top vote getters, and that can be a nonpartisan person, a Republican, a Democrat, peace and freedom, libertarian, what have you. Two top vote getters meet in November in a runoff.
Right.
Okay. The only exception to that is that if somebody were to get 50% plus one.
On some offices.
Yeah, some offices.
Some offices.
Yes.
So the confusion becomes there's so many different categories
Right,
of offices.
so you got to put local government in one category,
Right.
state government in another.
And
Okay.
federal in another.
And
so
federal
on.
in another to
Yeah.
some degree. So, in other words, we follow federal regs for congressional races
Right.
and Senate races, state, Senate. And there's another way of that we follow it is for state candidates.
Right.
So what we're speaking to was state candidates.
Right.
Okay. So
So for state candidates,
everybody,
to-
so when the voter gets in the voting booth, what he'll see that's different, he no longer will get a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot. He'll get one ballot, and everybody who's running, including nonpartisan people, will be on that ballot, and you can vote for anybody you want.
that's right. So, and it's really important in the June primary to vote, because the top two candidates there are the only names that will appear in November.
Correct.
And then the presidential race is a little bit different.
Yes, presidential and Central Committee races, only if you're a Republican can you vote for a Republican in the primary
Right.
for president. All the rest is open.
Right.
And the same thing for the Democrat and Republican Central Committees and the other Central Committees.
Right.
It's just one race.
Yeah. And the biggest problem that I see is that the voter turnout in June primaries tends to be lower than it is in November.
Yes. I think for primary in Placer, I think we'll probably hit 47, 48%, maybe 50 for
This
elected.
year?
Yes, this year.
47, 48.
In November, I think we'll see probably in the neighborhood of 75 to 78%. Presidential, Placer County's had a 90% turnout. in November.
And what do you attribute that to?
Well, I think the last election for president and the election before that for president, on a national level, everybody wanted to vote. And that's what created some of the lines and what happened in some of the other states, even some lines here in California, not in Placer County. But yeah, that's why it happened. People decided to go to the polls to
Right.
vote. And
Maybe it's all the buzz around the November election.
Right.
But people don't realize that the June primary
is the key to November.
Is the key to November.
Right.
And it is just as important to vote in June as it
Right.
is in
You
November.
could have a situation where you have two Democrats that are going to meet in November, two Republicans, a Democrat and a nonpartisan. Any combination you can think of could happen. But I think it's really difficult for the minor parties now to make it to November because minor parties you're only talking about 2 or 3%, and they just don't have the base to be able to turn out for their candidate to be a factor in November.
Let me ask you, as the registrar of voters or as a private citizen, what do you think of this top two primary system that we enacted as voters in California?
Well, I will say this. The open primary does put everybody on the same field together at one time. And the way the law is written, that the top two vote getters meet in November. Will it always be a Republican and a Democrat? No, I'm sure there will be the exception at some point in time in some of the races. But anything that gets people to the polls and it's more easier for them to vote, and this is an easier way to vote, rather than me producing 4 different sample ballots, I'm down to producing 2 different types probably. Saves money that way. So just on the fiscal part of it, I probably would be in favor, but I also feel that it will encourage more voters to vote. That was the idea behind the passage of this law.
On the other side, I think the concern is that the other parties, besides the Democratic and the Republican parties, are somewhat shut out because it's very difficult for them to get enough votes to be on the November ballot.
Right. That's just what I just said, and you're 100% right. It basically stops all the minor parties from having a say. And if you're starting out with a small minor party, you want to have your name out there so you can attract more people to your party. Well, the way it's going to be set up now, it's going to be very difficult for a new party or even one of the old, smaller parties to have any really effect in November.
That's right.
And those voters are going to go someplace to vote. So I plan to write a pretty good explanation in the sample ballot what the primary is all about.
Oh, good. That would be very helpful to people. Sure. Now, one of the other things that you're very active in that is appreciated by a lot of people in Placer County is you do a lot of things to help candidates go through the process of how to be a candidate and run for office. Can you describe that a little bit, please?
Sure. I would beg to say that your viewers today would have a very difficult time in naming 5 people that are on your fire board, or 5 people who are on your water board, or for that, who's your 5 city council members in Roseville. I started out to want to take the mystery out of elections and to increase elections. And only about 30% of the races that were up for election when I first took over actually went to election because there was lack of interest, not enough people filed for the position to create a ballot situation, a race, if you will. So I started putting on workshops, and I taught people how to run for office. I brought in some political consultants, and they gave them ideas of how to run a successful campaign without spending a little bit of money, how to win your election spending less than $1,000. And I brought in speakers that have been successful in their races, and what did they do to get elected. And then we have a lot of books that we can lend out to teach you how to run for office. And then we teach you all the paperwork that you have to file to become a candidate. And we actually bring in people that are on fire boards, water boards. How much time do you spend if you get elected? Does it cost any money? That's always an important question. But what has made California great. And what has made Placer County the best county to live in my opinion, is because...
Totally unbiased opinion. Of
Right.
course.
Because we care about our community. I saw one set of numbers once that up to 72% of the people who live within Placer County are involved in some manner. Their church, baseball, little league, soccer moms, not just the political stuff, because you judge a community by how many volunteers can show up for a good cause. And Placer County leads, in my opinion, the state in people participation, like they call it. And that's what this program was all about, was to teach you how to run for office. And so was it a good turnout? Well, we went from 28 to 32% to 78% of the races now go to election.
That's fantastic.
You know.
And the biggest drawbacks or the biggest obstacles standing in a person's way to decide to run for Congress is knowledge about what it takes to run.
Exactly.
Concerns about money and how much money does it take to run. And then some uncertainty about what's the commitment, time commitment, and so on.
Right. So that's what we try to bring to the table. When you go to a class, that's what you'll be taught. And if you think your son or daughter's not getting a good education, run for a school board.
Run for a school board, absolutely.
If you think your water's not good, run for the water board, PCWA. If you think that you're in danger of having a fire in your backyard, hey, run for the fire board. So, and every city has something to run for, so, and the other thing to remember that in November, everything goes to election simultaneously. All the school boards, all the city elections, all the fire, water boards, recreation, parks, all those people have a group of 5 people that run the district.
Right.
And they make the decisions. They control millions and millions and millions of our tax dollars.
That's right.
And we should have an interest in how that money's being spent.
That's right. And I think people don't necessarily realize that. They look at the spending at the federal level without realizing that the federal government may allocate money, but the spending actually occurs locally right here.
Exactly.
And it's done by these people running for city offices. And as you said, all of the local offices below the county level only come up for election in November.
Correct.
And that's good because that's when the voter turnout happens to be higher.
Is the highest. And that's why I went to every school board, every city, every district, and persuaded them to move their elections to the even November year cycle. And there was 2 points why they did it. Number one, I cut their cost in half.
Right.
And I haven't raised my cost for doing their elections in the last 7 or 8 years or so. Because when you have everybody going simultaneously, you can divide up the cost better, okay? And the other reason was, as you said, in November, we'll have at least a 75% turnout.
Right.
But when we used to have the city elections in April and March, in the odd year, we'd get a 35% turnout if we were lucky. In November, in the odd year, the turnout would be 45 to 47. And these offices were not being elected by the majority of the people. So for financial reasons and doing the right thing, that's why they moved there to the November even year cycle.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's all that we have. Is there any final words that you'd like to say to our viewers regarding your...
Well, if you have any questions of voting, if you want to run for office, we're going to have workshops during the summer, starting in June sometime, I expect, and we'll teach you how to be a candidate. And other than that, it's been a pleasure that I've served so many years for you guys, and it also is very warming to my heart that I've been returned to office again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for Blue Values TV. Until next time, good night.